When you look at Donald Trump, who I know you've worked for, as mentioned, he has always lost the popular vote to the candidates he's run against. He's never won more votes than Clinton or Biden. And then with the midterms we put up on the screen, he's been a drag according to many ways you can measure it in the midterms, including the most recent one. So my question to you would be, what does he need to do differently if he's going to try to actually win more votes in this campaign he's currently running?
Well, I think that, I think the next campaign is really going to be about policy. President Biden has a record this time around. He did not have a record in 2020. And so he will have to defend his positions. He'll have to defend the economy, gas prices, all of the actions, the southern border that he has taken during his 4 years in office. And they'll compare that to whether it's President Trump or someone else who gets the Republican nomination. It'll be a battle between Joe Biden's policies and results versus what a Republican candidate can offer.
Yeah, I think when you say that, sir, it sounds pretty straightforward that there's a policy debate. Of course, the candidate running now, Donald Trump, isn't making that any easier or really a policy-based discussion. He's doing a lot of other things I think you're familiar with. Let's just take one example since you're here tonight. He's openly calling on, quote, terminating the Constitution. How can you support a candidate for office who's vowing to betray what is the oath of office to uphold the Constitution?
But I think, obviously everyone knows that there is no mechanism in the Constitution or in the law, and I'll defer to you, you're the lawyer, Ari, but that will allow for the relitigation or re-election of the 2020 campaign. And I think if anything really is been proven out through the midterms, it was that the candidates that focused on the future and not necessarily relitigating the past were the ones who performed best in the midterms on the Republican side. So I think that would be an area, just taking a look at history that you would look forward to say, let's move forward and talk about the future of our country, where we can take it, and not necessarily relitigate what has already transpired.
So that's a new statement from him about the past. Is that, in your view, a mistake?
Well, I think obviously everyone knows that, there's no mechanism to do that. I think the one thing he probably did accomplish is that he's got a lot of folks talking about an issue in terms of the Twitter document dump and its impact with the Democrats, the Biden campaign, the FBI colluding with big tech and putting their thumb on the scale for the 2020 election. That's not something that many in the mainstream media have been wanting to cover. So you could actually take a look at that one post that he's put out, and he put out another one today on that position, has driven a conversation that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be had.
Well, let's take you at face value of what you're asserting, that this illegal call to terminate the Constitution, which you say is inoperative, can't be done, is somehow has a PR or other benefit of driving another conversation. That seems to be a pretty thin reed to lay it on. I mean, I assume you, as someone who's worked in government, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I assume you took that seriously. How can you suggest that voters support someone who's doing the opposite, who's vowing to betray it in a way that you just conceded isn't allowed, and then tell me, well, it's all about getting people to talk about Twitter? I mean, I don't even think if you accepted that exchange, it's a good exchange, is it? You betray the Constitution just to change the PR discourse?
Well, it wasn't a betrayal. It was a tweet about what he thinks should happen. Obviously, it can't happen. And when it comes to whether the voters will talk about that or whether they will support him, I think that will be a discussion during the 2024 primary season. And whether anyone else gets into the race, that's something he's going to have to decide. And the other candidates that might be in the race will weigh those options. And then obviously, whomever the voters think best represents their interests is the one that obviously will get the nomination, and then it will be up to the general voters to decide in the general election.
Yeah, I understand. It sometimes feels like you're talking about the process to avoid talking about the substance. We understand there's a process, and there may or may not be other candidates, but you've been in the Trump White House. That's part of why you're here tonight. You also worked, as mentioned, for Vice President Pence. Do you think Donald Trump was wrong to inflame the passions and the actions of those Trump supporters and endanger Vice President Pence and his family, your former boss?
Well, I think if you look at what the vice president has just recently written in his book, he said that the president had expressed remorse about that days after the event, and also had even questioned whether that January 6th rally should have ever taken place. And so I think obviously between the vice president's telling of that and recounting of that story, I think you can see that there was some rethinking of that as the days were coming down. But they've also been clear. There's going to be a lot of people who don't agree with how that tragic and terrible day went down, and I think that's something that again the voters will look to.
Was it wrong?
Well, I absolutely think that that the actions that happened on January 6th, and I divide them into two camps. If you were there at the Ellipse during that rally on January 6th, you were exercising your First Amendment right to freedom of assembly and speech. If you crossed the police barrier and entered the Capitol, then you committed a crime, and the full weight of the Justice Department is currently doing that.
Okay. And I think that's fair what you're referring to. And there are rights, of course, to go to protest and say all kinds of things. The question, just to be precise, though, you said I'm the lawyer. Let's go look back at the text, was about what Trump did vis-a-vis your other former boss, Pence. Let's play a little bit of Mike Pence talking about how Trump did endanger him.
The president's words were reckless, and his actions were reckless. The president's words that day at the rally endangered me and my family and everyone at the Capitol building.
Was Mike Pence correct that it was dangerous and wrong of Donald Trump to do that?
Well, and I think that, according to the vice president's book, he even expressed the fact that they questioned whether they should have had the rally. So that means right there that he was looking back on it and wondering whether that was the right action to take.
Was Donald Trump wrong to do what I just showed you Mike Pence said he did, which was endanger his family? I mean, this is one of the most serious issues around as people decide who's going to get back into power. Yes or no, was that right or wrong?
Well, I think obviously history is going to judge that as a tragic day in our nation's history in the Capitol. And I think they're going to have to decide in terms of what role did everyone play, whether it was holding the rally, whether it was with the rhetoric and things that were used. But clearly, those who crossed into the Capitol broke the law, and they're now facing the weight of the justice system because of it.
Yeah. Well, one thing we can agree on is people can listen, people can make up their own minds. As I tell viewers, we try to hear from everyone so people can do that. Mark Lauder, I appreciate you coming on the beat tonight, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ari.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber. Thanks for watching The Beat. I wanted to let you know I'm writing a foreword to the January 6th committee's full report, which is coming out soon from HarperCollins. You can go pre-order the book right now, and it'll come to you first when the report comes out in the fall or whenever the government releases it. Just search Melber Jan 6 on Amazon or your favorite independent book site and click pre-order. You'll be the first to get both the report and my new piece on the coup conspiracy. You can also go to melberbook.com and order it there.